Welcome, David.
Hello. Sorry about the connection problems.
That's okay. That was probably my fault in some way. So how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
We're very happy to have you with us.
It's good to be with you. I'm actually in Colorado. I was here on for a funeral this weekend and sitting in a parking lot of a hotel because I got booted out before I go to get my flight. So
Okay. All right.
Glad to be with you.
All right. Well, great. We're just thrilled to have you. And so what we've been doing, we've been talking about the compelling vision, piece by piece. And I want to ask you a few questions and get thoughts and responses. So our first question, what does it look like, or what does it mean to be or embody Jesus in the neighborhood?
I think for me, I think embodying Jesus in the neighborhood is really understanding who your neighborhood is first. It's really making sure you understand what's going on in the life of your neighborhood and how, what that neighborhood looks like. I mean, for every congregation, that's a little different in terms of the local part of the neighborhood, as well as the global part of the neighborhood. And so it's understanding that, and then it's really assessing some of the needs within your neighborhood and reaching out and connecting to the neighborhood in that kind of way. It's about really getting in touch with the person, rather than, when you identify the issues and needs of a neighborhood, it's one thing to identify them and try to address them, but really deep down, embodying Jesus in the neighborhood is really, I believe, this idea of really connecting with the person in the personal need within the neighborhood.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, we had Russ Madison. You know Russ.
Oh yeah.
He reframed this in a very interesting way. He said, and we might also think about it as seeing Jesus in the neighborhood. Might you be able to speak to that as well?
Oftentimes, we in the church believe we have it all to offer. That we know it all, that we can fix all, that we can address all. And oftentimes, if we're really connecting with our neighborhoods, we'll already see Jesus present and alive in the people and within our neighborhoods. And I think it's really embracing what's already present, and understanding that our neighborhoods may not be like us or look like us or think like us or whatever the case may be, but they're very much living out Jesus within their own lives and within their own neighborhood. And so how do we understand that and live into that?
Thank you. So today we've been breaking down this compelling vision piece by piece. Today we're examining this piece that says develop a culture of calling and equipping. What do you believe it requires to develop a culture of calling and equipping? And then how do we go about doing that?
Well, that's something we can do overnight. We have all the answers to what that looks like. Seriously, I think this idea of calling and equipping, I think in a lot of ways we've lost our sense in the life of the church of our responsibility. And I say this very generally because I don't know your congregation. But in some of my own experiences as a pastor and a district executive out and about, there were a lot of people that were willing to talk about what it meant to be calling leadership, but to accept that call on their own, to really to own their role as a disciple. Being a follower and disciple of Jesus is not passive. It's very much very, very active, and it's always this sense of self-examination and what kind of gifts has God blessed me with, and how am I using those gifts within the larger community of faith in the neighborhood. But it's also as a church, being an intentional and active body that is exploring the gifts of its members, talking about those gifts and calling out those gifts. And so it really begins locally. It's understanding the giftedness of the church. It's acting as leadership to call gifts out, and for those who are called out to recognize this whole idea that this is not David Steele asking you to do this. In your setting, it's the church. It's the church that's it's actually God through the church who's extending this call for you to go out and to accept this call into whatever leadership it is. And I think until we open ourselves up to that kind of call, that kind of responsibility, that kind of a personal engagement, that's developing this sense of culture. And then it extends out in our sense into the districts. When districts call us into leadership or call us as a congregation to be helpful in the life of the district, or whatever the case may be, that we're stepping up into that. It's not about we're too busy, we've got too much going on in our lives. It's taking seriously this whole idea that being a disciple of Jesus is not sitting back and letting everybody else to do it. So that's a little bit of the way I would address that.
Thank you. I'll give an amen to that.
Too often we hire the pastor to do the work for us, and it's always, well, the pastor will do that. Or if we sit long enough, it's as simple as, who wants to pray to close our meeting? And we all just kind of put our heads down or kind of look out of the corner of our eye, and wait for the pastor to say, all right, I'll do it. It's really that whole sense of ownership and saying, okay, I'm going to step in and live into this. I'm a disciple and follower of Jesus Christ. And it's not just the pastor's responsibility. It is our responsibility as a congregation.
As a pastor, thank you for saying that, David. Thank you for saying that. So what I want to ask next is, as you envision, as the General Secretary, as you have envisioned the denomination living out the compelling vision statement, what do you see, or perhaps what have you already seen happening?
Well, I think we need to be careful to assume that it's not already been happening, that being Jesus in the neighborhood's been going on in the life of our church for a lot of years. I think adopting this vision statement is a way to embrace a common focus and emphasis in the life of the church, that we can all kind of work at that together, and understand what we're doing together in light of that. I think it's I think that local congregations of being Jesus in the neighborhood, as I said, long before we adopted this statement, and I think part of it is for us denominationally to say is to really begin to tell our stories of how we're being Jesus in the neighborhood and sharing those stories. I think our board recently made, the Mission Ministry Board recently made a change to our communication policy and really one of the pieces that the board wants us to emphasize as staff is telling the stories of churches being Jesus in the neighborhood, and as a way to encourage all of us. I mean, I always, as a pastor, I always kept my ears open. How are other churches doing things? What might I learn from their stories and their ministries that may not be identical? It may not live out identically in my community, but there may be ways to modify or adjust that to make it come alive. And I think so. That's part of denominationally the way, we're hoping that we begin to listen for and begin to tell the stories of congregations that are already doing that. I think the other part of that is for us to begin to work with district executives in terms of our staff to think about this whole idea of creating this culture of calling. We're at a time in the life of our church that, without a doubt, we have a minister shortage, so to speak. Part of that is for congregations to embrace new ways of thinking about doing ministry. Not all churches may have the traditional paid minister. I mean, part of that may be embracing some of our history of, I want to be careful how I say this idea of free ministry, where you have, it's not that we're avoiding the remuneration of a pastor or leadership in the life of the church, but it is thinking about how do we call out a team from people within our congregation to care for the ministries, to care for the congregation. Some of you may have gifts in pastoral care as deacons who can do the visiting and help care for the congregation. Some of you may have gifts of teaching and that could live out in the life of worship. Some of you may have gifts of worship leadership, and so it's not just having a traditional pastor do this. So it's working at this whole idea of creating a culture, a calling culture, to call out leadership, to make sure that we're working to provide opportunities for nurturing the gifts and providing resources. I think while we were trying to do this ahead of pandemic, I think the pandemic has helped all of us embrace this kind of interaction, this electronic interaction. And so, providing resources denominationally out of our office and other districts sharing their resources electronically to train, to help resource people within the life of the church is another way I think we want to work at that denominationally as a staff. I think for us as denominational staff, we adopted a new strategic plan. The board did a year ago. There's part of that plan that has created a little controversy in the life of the church. In part, people are raising the question, why did we adopt a strategic plan based on the compelling vision before the compelling vision was released? And it was in part about timing. The board was set to approve the plan at the same summer conference as the annual conference was supposed to look at and possibly affirm the vision, which was the cancellation summer of annual conference. The board moved ahead, and so some people found that problematic. For me as general secretary, I supported their decision because we had over 3,000 plus responses from districts, conversations from annual conference. It was the best body of information we had to reflect the needs of the church and where the church was at. And so that's why I would support, even if the vision hadn't been affirmed this summer, for me, it was still this idea of Jesus in the neighborhood, and that vision was still where I think the board should have made their decision. So I'm glad they did. The one strategic goal on racial justice, people have had problems with because it has language about repenting of our whiteness, which people have taken literally, which was never intended to take literally. It was just for us as a board and staff to really understand and recognize how our systems, and evaluate and assess our systems and processes and ministries have all been created from, I'll say it from my perspective, a male-led, by and large, a male-led church. And it's really a white male. And so how do we make sure that we're being sensitive to the people of color within our denomination? And for us, it's starting first and foremost with us as staff. The strategic plan is the board's plan. Was never intended to be voted on by the denomination. So it's the board's plan, and it's something that we're living out of as we develop ministries that, by and large, points us towards the compelling vision. And so I'm excited. We're just beginning to live into that, to assess our ministries in relation to that, and the compelling vision. So we've got a lot of work to do, but we're really excited about the direction that we're heading.
Well, thank you very much, David. This has been very insightful, given us a really good look into just what's going on with the Mission and Ministry Board, but there's also how you see us living this out. So thank you for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Very welcome.
Have a safe flight back home.
Well, thank you. God's blessings on your ministry. Good to see you all.
All right. God be with you, David. Thank you.
Take care.